All right, it's 11:03. Why don't we get going? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this briefing on business support for the Build Back Better Act. I'm Steve Hargraves from Climate Nexus, and I'll be moderating today's briefing on why these companies are urging Congress to pass the full scope of social and climate programs contained in President Biden's Build Back Better agenda. As you know, many trade groups, including the Chamber of Commerce, are lobbying heavily against the Build Back Better plan, urging support instead for only the narrow infrastructure bill that heavily funds roads, bridges, and other fossil fuel dependent projects. This group here aims to show that not all businesses are against Build Back Better and will explain the full suite of climate and social initiatives are ultimately better for everyone's bottom line. This call is being recorded, and an audio file of this call will be available upon request. So let me introduce our panel. Today, we'll start with representatives from two sustainable business associations, Jeffrey Hollander, CEO and co-founder of the American Sustainable Business Council, and Bob Keefe, Executive Director of E2. We'll then pivot to our panel of company executives, including Coralie Kenna, Head of Policy and Communications at Patagonia, Maureen Klein, Vice President of Public Affairs and Sustainability at Pirelli Tires North America, Gilbert Campbell, CEO of Volt Energy, Corinne Hansen, Sustainability Director at SH Hotels and Resorts, and Jamie Athos, the CEO of Tofurky. There will be time for Q&A after our panelists have finished their introductory remarks. If you've joined online, please type your questions as well as your name and news outlet through the Q&A box below, or you can ask them directly to the panel. That will put you in a queue, and then I'll read your question to aloud if you have typed it in. Now, let's hear from Jeffrey and Bob. Jeffrey Hollander, CEO and co-founder of the American Sustainable Business Council, I'll start with you. Why should the business community as a whole be supporting strong climate and social policies?
Thanks, Steve. Yes, I'm Jeffrey Hollander, and in addition to being the CEO of the American Sustainable Business Council that represents over 200,000 US companies, I'm also the co-founder and former CEO of Seventh Generation. As business leaders, we're committed to profitability and the long-term success of our businesses. It's absolutely critical, as Steve said, that we take urgent action on climate change. This is essential for our businesses as well as the American economy. If you're in New Orleans and you're out of power, you're out of business. If you're in New Jersey and under 6 feet of water, you're out of business. If you're in South Lake Tahoe watching your business burn, you're out of business. Failing to act will cause profound and unacceptable human suffering and tremendous expense that will compromise the competitiveness of US companies. You cannot claim to be concerned about climate change and oppose this reconciliation bill. Those two positions are irreconcilable. The Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, and others lobbying against this package do not represent American businesses and the companies speaking out today. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Now let's hear from Bob Keefe, Executive Director of E2. Same question, Bob. Why should the business community as a whole be supporting strong climate and social policies?
Well, it's harder to follow somebody like Jeffrey because he summed it up. Look, last year we had $99 billion in economic damage from climate change, from weather-related events in this country. Hurricanes in the east, so many we had that we ran out of names for them. Wildfires in the west that are still burning. Droughts in the nation's heartland, flooding in the nation's heartland. In the 2000s, the costs of climate change were about half that much, about $54 billion a year. So this isn't going in the right direction. And it's not going in the right direction for the planet. It's not going in the right direction for our businesses. It's not going in the right direction for our economy. Businesses everywhere are impacted, as Jeffrey points out, from retailers to restaurants to real estate agents, every sector of the economy. We know this because we hear this from our 10,000 plus members and supporters at E2 who cover the broad swath of the economy. Businesses are worried about this, and understandably so. A survey by Deloitte earlier this year showed that more than 80% of business executives are concerned about the impacts of climate change on their companies. We're going to hear how that plays out at companies, thanks to some of our fantastic panelists on with us today. But it's playing out in every corner of business, and it's playing out in a bad way. Good news. We have a plan to address this, guys. It's sitting in Congress right now. The Build Back Better Act, the Reconciliation Bill, the Infrastructure Bill. These things need to get passed. They need to get passed because businesses are hurting across the country. They need to get passed because we need to fund these investments in clean energy and climate resilience to both address those economic costs of climate change and, by the way, get going with the economic benefits of climate action, creating millions of jobs, driving billions in investments, and very importantly, making sure America is competitive with the rest of the world that's moving forward. So the message that I have here today is that, again, the Chamber, the Business Roundtable, others, they don't speak for the majority of businesses across America. The majority of businesses across America are feeling climate change firsthand, and they want Congress to do something about it. And hopefully we'll get moving again on that this week. So thank you, Steve. I'm going to send it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. Let's hear from some of these businesses now. I'll start with Coralie Kenna, Head of Policy and Communications at Patagonia. Coralie, how is climate change currently impacting your business, and why does Patagonia support strong climate and social action?
Thank you, Steve, and thanks just generally for the opportunity to share. So Patagonia strongly urges swift passage of this budget reconciliation package. It's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to avoid a worsening climate crisis and to give working families the support that they deserve now. To pay for this legislation, Patagonia is willing to pay our fair share, a higher corporate tax rate, and we urge Congress to consider ending subsidies for the extractive industries. The climate investments would accelerate an energy economy based on wind and solar, fund the civilian climate corps, and protect threatened landscapes such as the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. The paid leave provisions would enable people to return to the labor force by addressing the urgent issues of childcare availability. These investments are popular, critical, and urgently needed. Companies that spend millions of dollars marketing their climate programs are quick to tell their employees and customers how important it is to protect the planet and support working families. Should be excited about these investments, not hiding behind trade groups and business associations who are actively lobbying against them. And it defies logic, to put it nicely, that groups that say companies should deliver long-term value to all of their stakeholders, not just their shareholders, would lobby against these investments. Patagonia is not a part of the Business Roundtable or the Chamber of Commerce. We are a part of the Benefit Corporation movement and the Outdoor Industry Association and the ASBC, and appreciate that all three have endorsed the climate and care investments in the budget reconciliation bill. The outdoor industry generates nearly $800 billion in revenue and employs more than 5 million people. And we are at the front lines of the fight against climate change because of supply chain disruptions, the shifting consumer environment, and the impact of extreme weather events on the American outdoor experience, really the global outdoor experience. We are already taking significant actions to reduce emissions and protect nature, but the federal government needs to do more if we're going to prevent the worst effects of climate change. The costs to prevent, build resilience, clean up disasters, and implement reduction measures will be significantly higher if we wait. Failing to act will cost more human suffering and drive up unbearable costs, and will only serve to create more inequities and more polarization in our society.
Great. Thank you, Coralie. Very well put. Next is Maureen Klein, Vice President of Public Affairs and Sustainability at Pirelli Tires North America. Maureen, how is climate change currently impacting your business, and why does your company support strong climate and social policies?
I was on mute, sorry. So I represent the US subsidiary of a multinational tire company headquartered in Italy. So my comments will reflect a bit of a European perspective. Pirelli's in the supply chain of the automotive industry, of course, and transportation accounted for almost a third of US greenhouse gas emissions in 2019, according to the EPA. I think it's almost funny that we're talking about impacts because we know the impacts. It's clear, the science is clear, the IPCC report is clear. We don't need to prove that. I think most people understand that 197 countries didn't come together and sign the Paris Agreement lightly. That commitment meant an enormous transformation of our entire economic system. And the auto industry sees that and is getting ahead of that with the transformation to electric vehicles. I don't understand why we're not treating this crisis the way we treated COVID-19. Congress came together to pass the CARES Act because the first priority was human life. And this is a similar situation. We're talking about the future of humanity. It should not be a partisan issue. But I'll talk a little bit about the automotive industry. The car companies are investing heavily in electric vehicles. They know they have to get ahead of this. And to make the massive transformation, you don't just need to transform the car itself, you need to scale the battery supply chain. You need as good an infrastructure of electric vehicle chargers as we now have in gas stations. You need changes to retail and car maintenance, and a lot of things will change. And once we've electrified everything, of course, we need a massive amount of power in the grid, and it needs to be sourced from renewable energy. We don't just need to transform existing electrical needs to renewable energy. We're going to be pulling a lot more electricity off the grid, and it needs to be green energy. So we need to invest in energy distribution and smart grids and all kinds of innovations. The bipartisan infrastructure bill includes $7.5 billion for EV chargers and another $7.5 billion for zero or low emissions bus fleets and ferries, but we need much more. And the electric vehicle transition can't just happen by itself. We need consumer incentives. We need to fund the utilities to raise the amount of renewable energy they're putting into the grid massively, as is contained in the Build Back Better. So the United States should be leading the world in innovation, embracing the opportunities of the future. Instead of spending hundreds of billions of dollars to clean up after extreme weather events, we need preventive care. And we need to lead the world in that. And I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you so much, Maureen. Next, let's go to Gilbert Campbell. Gilbert is the CEO of Volt Energy. Gilbert, how is climate change currently impacting your business? And why does Volt support strong climate and social policies?
Sure. Great question, and very similar to comments made by the other panelists, but we're a business comprised of people like any other business, and our people have been impacted by climate change. I'll give a few examples. Number one, when you look at COVID-19, we're doing a project at Howard University right now, and we intentionally picked a diverse subcontractor that has mostly a diverse workforce in poor parts of Washington, D.C. And as COVID-19 played out in the earlier stages, African-American communities, per study done by Harvard University, showed a particular matter called 2.5, which is an air pollutant, which is more prevalent in African-American communities as a direct result. COVID effects were exacerbated in African-American communities. So how does that relate to my business? We had 2 people in our supply chain that worked for one of our installers to lose 2 workers. And so that is definitely personal. As a result, from an air pollutant that's been that's been plaguing Black and brown communities for so long. So why is it important to me as far as climate change and social policy and having strong climate policies, and in my business? We're a small business. We're a small, diverse-owned business that's focusing on tackling climate change. And for me, one of the most important things is, as we make this transition, which we will make, is to make sure it's done in an equitable way. And one of the things that I truly appreciate about the the budget and the Reconciliation Act, it truly has a focus on equity as we're making the transition into climate policy. And what am I talking about? Well, Justice 40% of investments made in to address climate change will be made in communities of color, which is extremely important. Why is that important? If we look at what's happening in our nation, by 2035, hopefully we'll be close to a carbon-free power grid. In that same time frame, we're working towards significant investments in the reconciliation bill to upgrade our transportation sector through EVs. Well, Black and brown communities have the highest carbon emissions as it relates to our transportation system. So swapping out, regular vehicles and buses to electric vehicles and electric buses will have a huge impact. A lot of buildings in minority communities run on, natural gas stoves. As we're switching to, decarbonizing our entire building sector, those communities need to be kept in at the forefront as well. And then lastly, I'll just comment, I'm in the solar industry. So if we look at the solar industry, who's prior to COVID was growing at 12 times faster than the national economy and only represents 4% of electricity generation in the country now, in order to meet our goals of getting to 100% decarbonization in the power sector by 2035, a recent Department of Energy study showed that we need to be at 45% solar generation. We're at 4%. That 4% right now, though, represents 10,000 companies, 10,000 small, medium, and large businesses in America that are thriving. It represents over 230,000 Americans getting good paying jobs. So as we go from 4% to 45%, there's a wealth transfer that's going to continue to happen. There will be more people brought up into the middle class in places that are suffering the most. We're talking about minority communities and underserved rural communities. So I don't know how a business or a politician with a conscience cannot focus on dealing with two of the biggest issues that our world is facing: climate change and poverty. So for all those reasons stated, Volt Energy and myself, Gilbert Campbell, are fully committed to the budget reconciliation moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Gilbert. Now let's go to Corinne Hansen. Corinne is the Director of Sustainability and Impacts at SH Hotel and Resorts. Corinne, same question. How is climate change currently impacting your business? And why does your company support strong climate and social policies?
Thank you, Steve. I have to agree wholeheartedly with everything that's been said so far. We are in the hospitality industry, and we are, just like the rest of the businesses that are speaking today, impacted by climate change in so many different ways. I'm actually sitting in one of our properties right now. I'm in Harriet's Lounge at our Brooklyn Bridge One Hotel. And it's fitting that I'm here today because this property in particular was heavily impacted by climate change. In 2012, when Sandy hit the Atlantic, we had to completely redesign the property, do on new water level restrictions since we're right on the water here. And that cost us a fortune, pushed back design, directly impacted all of our partners that we were working with. It's a huge financial cost to them as well, and obviously hit the city quite hard. So it resonates quite strongly with me that it's a lot more than just raising the level of our property and having to put touches to the property like water line to signal how this impacted us. It's so core to our business that I think it would be insane for us to think that it would be more cost effective for us, purely from a financial perspective, to push off bills like the Build Back Better plan and incur these retroactive costs of trying to change our designs and respond to massive impacts from climate change. It would be in our own financial interest as a business to act preventatively, to act now, and to act with the full force of the bill as it is, rather than to wait and try to deal with the impacts. It doesn't make sense for us as a business. And I think too, Gilbert just spoke of the Justice 40. Those are the people that work for in all of our properties. We are a very diverse company overall, and it's critical that we be paying attention to the impacts to our entire workforce, our entire team makeup, that we cannot push these costs back off onto the people, onto the general public, to again deal retroactively with the impacts of climate change. We have to be acting preventatively. And if we're honest, the time to act preventatively already passed, to push this off any further would be irresponsible for us, our investors, our shareholders, and for our teams, and for us as a business. So this strikes very close to home for us at SH, and I think it makes perfect sense that we would be trying our hardest to act now. So that's what we're here trying to speak about today.
Thanks so much, Corinne. Finally, let's go to Jamie Athos. Jamie is the CEO of Tofurky. Jamie, you probably know the question by now, but how is climate change currently impacting your business? And why does your company support strong climate and social policies?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So a little bit about my company. So we are based in the Northwest. We're about an hour east of Portland. We're in a very small town. It's called Hood River. We employ about 220 people. And we've been in the business of making plant-based meat products since 1980. We've been doing this a long time, and we've been doing it in this area. I want to talk about, so you might have heard about in June, there's a pretty historic heat wave that hit the Northwest. And if you don't remember that because of all the other extreme weather events that are in the news all the time, I don't blame you. It seems like very common these days. But in the ramp up to this extreme heat event, the forecast was predicting temperatures that ramped up sort of day by day in a series of successive new record temperatures. And we got to kind of see how our business reacted to that, specifically our cooling systems. So we started supplementing our cooling capacity because the air was so hot that the heat couldn't be exhausted outside. So we started adding sprinklers to those evaporators. Our cold spaces couldn't maintain temperatures if the doors were opened and closed like normal, so we limited that activity also. We slowed the throughput through our kind of inline manufacturing processes. Those cooling steps couldn't keep up, so we slowed it down also. Ultimately, the nature was too much. It overwhelmed those systems, and we had to cancel 2 full days of production. Because at that point, we couldn't keep the production floor cool enough to keep our people safe and comfortable. And we couldn't run our processes effectively to meet our food safety requirements. As we all know, a lot of businesses like ours are struggling to get labor these days too. And so 2 days of no production, the opportunity cost to us was huge at a time when we cannot meet demand anyway. And it's just frustrating to be in that position, to run out of options, to literally have no options. And especially given that we as an individual company have taken steps to be more responsible, to be more considerate of the impacts of our business on climate. We have solar panels on the roof. We have an inherently lower carbon product, but that kind of just points out this is a problem that's too big for anybody or any company to take on alone. It requires kind of collective action, but really it requires policy change. And so I'm here basically just to add my voice to the chorus of other business owners. I think this issue is often framed, addressing climate change as anti-business. And from my perspective, running a business, no, it's not. It's necessary to business. So I urge immediate action and bold, aggressive action. And as a business person also, we should also be pointing out that there's a first mover advantage here. The types of changes that we're talking about implementing in our society will give our country advantages in the global economy also. There is upside here, and playing catch up is not going to be efficient or effective ultimately.
Great, thank you, Jamie. That's a pretty, thanks for sharing that very detailed impact. That's crazy. And thank you all for sharing the impacts on your firms. I'll open it up to questions now. Again, folks on the line, just click on the Q&A button, type your question in, and you'll be put in the queue, or you can just unmute yourself and jump in with a question if you want to ask it that way. I have a couple of questions myself, which maybe I'll ask while we wait for folks on the line to formulate their own questions. The question I asked you all was to detail the current impacts of climate change that you're seeing, because we think it's obviously very important to emphasize that we're seeing that this is here and now. We're seeing these impacts today, but there's obviously impacts further down the line. And I'm kind of curious if you all, what types of what types of impacts you're anticipating going forward, and just, you know, how urgent is it that Congress acts now, you know, based on the types of impacts you're foreseeing in the future. And this is for anyone, actually. No one in particular. Anyone can feel free to hop in.
I'll jump in with some examples that are probably pretty obvious if you think about the sort of business that we're in. The supply chain disruptions. So we make our products out of a lot of kind of agricultural commodities, and those come from various places. We do our best to source those from kind of U.S. sources, but oftentimes things like a heat wave in Texas might impact our ability to get as many soybeans as we need, and we have to look further and wider. And that comes with its own logistics cost, its own kind of sustainability impacts, detrimental ones, and ultimately increases the cost of our products and makes them less competitive in the marketplace. Right now, our whole kind of industry, or the whole food system, is really experiencing some unprecedented levels of increase in raw materials costs for some of these reasons. We're seeing commodities go up by 20% to as much as 100% compared to last year's prices. Obviously, that's unsustainable. We cannot, be profitable or sustainable financially and absorb all those costs. So ultimately, that impacts the consumer, and we're going to see food prices increase substantially, probably on the shelf, as a result of those impacts.
Right.
And it wouldn't only be heat waves in Texas; it might be freezes in Texas, right?
As we've seen, totally. There's a question in the chat, which is a great one that I want to ask. Are any of the companies represented here also members of the Chamber of Commerce, or the Business Roundtable? If so, has their opposition to Build Back Better made you rethink your membership?
I can address that from an organizational perspective. We do not have overlapping membership with either the Chamber or the Business Roundtable. We do have some companies who were formerly part of those organizations that no longer are members. But I think that the position that those two organizations have taken is just not reconcilable with their stated concern about climate change. You can't be concerned about climate change and not support this reconciliation bill. We cannot achieve the objectives that we've set for our country without this reconciliation bill. And I think there's somewhat of a disingenuous event happening here when companies talk about becoming net zero and at the same time don't support this bill. It can't happen. It's not going to happen. And we need companies to basically be willing to step up to the plate, make an investment in our future, and not take the position that an extra amount of money on their tax bill will prevent the forward progress we need to make in mitigating climate change.
Right. Any of the other businesses represented here? I don't know if anyone else is.
I'll jump in. We evaluate continuously which trade associations to be a member of, and that evaluation includes the alignment with our policies, particularly climate and environmental and social policies. I think it's very important for companies to be very transparent about their political influence. So we disclose in our annual report what trade associations we're a member of, and some information on the alignment of our policies. And I know that there are companies that are working from the inside, and so there's definitely a point to be made about that. Hopefully they will have achieve results.
I did see that Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, was just took over the leadership role at the Business Roundtable. So we'll see what happens there. Anyone else want to chime in on that question?
I'll just add to really what's been said, and just say that, the threat of this crisis really requires everybody to be involved. And certainly it requires more than just statements or opinions about this crisis. And we need real systems change, which is why we need the US government and governments around the world to be involved. And business has an opportunity now to be involved with it. And we really need them to live up to the plans that they are putting forward. One of the things we're doing at Patagonia is trying to take a deeper look at our supply chain to consider our finance partners, even our advertising partners, to make sure that we're doing business with those that are truly putting actions behind the words that they say.
Thank you, Coralie. There's a few questions who have come in, so I want to make sure we can get to them. This one is specifically for Jeffrey. How can businesses get their voices heard to combat the U.S. Chamber of Commerce?
Well, first of all, we've been running for the first time in our history a paid advertising campaign to encourage companies to speak out. So we're hoping to reach somewhere close to 10 million companies to ask them to let the legislature know that they support Build Back Better. Of course, they can join the organizations like the ones represented here. Those are organizations that are committed to helping magnify the business voice of companies committed to fighting climate change. And, let your local representatives know. They need to hear your voice, particularly if you have a Republican representative. They need to hear that this bill is good for business. Maybe not if you're a fossil fuel company, but for the rest of the American economy, this is going to create jobs. And this is going to create, as we heard from Volt, good paying jobs to help people rise out of poverty. So this is a time, I have told the people that are around me, this is the most important legislative initiative that has taken place in my lifetime. If there was ever a time to get involved with politics and legislation, now is the time. Now is the time to make your voice heard. Join us and help get this package passed.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Hey, Steve, it's Bob with E2. Let me jump in there for a second as well, if I could, please.
Sure thing.
And just to point out that the consequences of businesses not speaking up is not good. Because guess what? The U.S. Chamber, API, NAM, these other major lobbies do this for a living. And they're talking to every lawmaker on Capitol Hill right now. Businesses that care about the environment, businesses that care about the impacts of the environment or climate change on their companies, on the economy, need to make their voices heard as well. And let me just back up for a second to what Jamie was talking about and I guess the other consequences that businesses are facing. CDP earlier this year, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, came out with a big survey of hundreds of business people across the country, around the world actually. They're expecting $120 billion in costs from environmental risk to supply chains alone over the next 5 years. That's a huge hit on any business that's going to be impacted by climate change, which is every business. A Stanford study earlier this year showed that the US GDP would be reduced by more than 30% over the next 80 years if we don't do something about climate change. That's going to impact every business on this call. It's going to impact every business in America. So yes, we need to speak up as much as we can through organizations like E2, through ASBC, but also as constituents of the lawmakers that are making these decisions on Capitol Hill as we speak.
Thanks, Bob, and that's great context that you provided there in terms of the economic damage. This is a great follow-up question, actually, from Heather Clancy at GreenBiz to the companies in particular. So what specifically are your companies doing to lobby on behalf of the legislation?
I can jump in there if you want, Steve. Thanks for the question, Heather. At Patagonia, we have sent letters directly to Senators Manchin and Sinema. You can find those on the press page of our website, which is actually patagoniaworks.com. Glad to follow up with you after with that as well. We've sent letters to the White House about our support, and we're using our brand voice and our convening power within our community, working to get signatures on various other sign-on letters, working with other CEOs in our networks, talking them through how we arrived at this decision. We're working with media. We've recently placed an op-ed in the Reno Gazette, which is where our distribution center is. We have 1,000 employees there, talking about the importance of this. So really doing what we can to kind of use our business and brand levers to create some support and momentum for this.
Thanks, Coralie. Anyone else want to try? Gilbert?
Yeah, I'll just say similar to Coralie. I sit on several boards, the Solar Energy Industries Association, or SEA, and the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, and have signed on, with those organizations and letters. But beyond that, direct, really championing of important aspects of the reconciliation of the climate bill with members of Congress. I was on a panel with Senator Wyden from Oregon probably about 3 weeks ago. And, obviously he's a huge proponent of the reconciliation. But one of the things I did highlight, and we're not in residential solar, but I care about people that live in low to moderate income areas. Well, if you look at the investment tax credit, if you don't have tax liability and we're coming out of a pandemic, you really can't benefit from owning a solar system, particularly in areas that need, clean power the most. So one of the things in the investment tax credit is called Section 25D, which would allow for, in lieu of a tax credit, a direct payment for homeowners that are looking to make the transition to solar. So that's one specific example. And Senator Wyden took note of that when we were on, during our panel. But on top of that, what I found to be impactful is talking to the generation that's going to inherit the mess if we don't take care of it. So this past weekend, I was in Atlanta for a conference. It's called Black Futures Weekend, about just technology things that are to be on the lookout for our African-American businesses. But as it relates specifically to this, we just can't, just letting the younger people know what inaction will cause. And if you think about it from this perspective, we send, as constituents, members to Capitol Hill. I live in Washington, D.C., to entrust the tax dollars that we all spend. And if we have a problem where our house is on fire, literally, and we have the opportunity to put it out, but put it out in a way that's going to allow us to make all these other upgrades in our house, make our house worth a lot more, create opportunities for generations after generations, and we say no. I say to any politician that is going to say no to putting our houses on fire and robbing America the opportunity to lead on climate change and climate investments, shame on you.
Thanks, Gilbert. Anyone else? Bob, you want to jump in here?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, in addition to what you're hearing from these business people today, in the past week or so, Heather, you probably know this at Green Biz, and others, you probably know this, but E2 last week sent up a letter signed by more than 400 business people in support of Build Back Better and the reconciliation bill. I know ASBC sent up a similar letter with hundreds of businesses signed onto that. Cumulatively, there's been thousands, more than 1,000 businesses in the past week alone have signed on to letters to every member of Congress saying, we need to do this, we need to get it done. We connected about 40 or so lawmaker offices with business people across America in the past couple of weeks, thanks to our federal affairs team at E2. And later this week, we'll be launching a major ad campaign within the Beltway and beyond, trying to amplify some of those business voices and making sure that Congress hears those. So Congress hopefully has both of its collective ears open, and it's not just listening to the chamber and the petroleum industry and business roundtable, but they're hearing from everyday American businesses all across the country as well.
Thanks, Bob. There's a couple of more questions in the chat, unless any of the other companies want to talk about the last one. The next one is from Dean Scott. It says, for any panelists broadly, beyond this bill's focus on climate resilience, clean energy, is there any sense of what steps beyond the Build Back Better bill are needed for companies to address climate change? I'm thinking broadly, for example, in the realm of soaring property insurance costs or revamping federal flood insurance, things outside of the parameters of Build Back Better. What's lacking?
I'd love to jump in here. Thanks for the question, Dean. I think it's very relevant to the conversation we're having. Absolutely, you're spot on that federal flood insurance, adjusting property insurance costs are hugely important to adapting to the situation around climate change. So we really need to shift our mindset that, when I was sort of early in my career in sustainability and working on the Hill, I was definitely programmed to think and talk about how this would impact our children and our children's children and leaving this for the generations after us. And I think that we hopefully are increasingly aware that that was sort of a false narrative, that this is very real and pertinent to us now, and is incredibly important that we do act now. And I think that the next major step for us as businesses is really clarifying that path toward decarbonization for our own supply chains, our own business activities, and that's certainly something that we're highly attuned to, looking at every opportunity to not only more finely track our energy efficiency and our energy consumption, but also looking more deeply at our supply chains. Where can we be more efficient in transportation? Where can we look to source increasingly locally everything from towels to all the food that's going into our restaurants and F&B outlets? And I think that a lot of companies have jumped on the opportunity to commit to 2050 climate change, decarbonization plans, net zero goals, things like that, without really having a foundational plan. And that's something we're really working on right now, is trying to figure out what is a realistic target, how can we be ambitious, but how can we do that and commit to that in a way that allows us to be a leader in the industry by being clear and transparent about what that plan looks like, so that we give others sort of a tool to map their own operations onto. And I think that's something that we would appreciate guidance from the government on, and would appreciate guidance and sort of input from many other actors. We don't want to act in a silo, and we don't want to be tracking toward 2050 at all. We want to be looking at a much sooner target. So that's absolutely why we're pushing for timely legislation like this.
Thanks, Corinne. Does anyone else want to take a stab?
I'll just jump in and say that there is a lot of action around ESG disclosure and transparency. And I think that the work that the SEC is doing around that is a critical complement to this bill. We need companies to be making much more detailed detailed information available to their stakeholders about what they're doing when it comes to climate change. If they're making a commitment, how are they doing with that commitment? Where are they? What actions have they taken? So we need that transparency. We need changing legislation around ESG so that it is a meaningful tool for stakeholders to make decisions about what companies they want to invest in and support.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Gilbert, did you come off mute? Did you want to chime in also, or?
Sure. I'll just add what we're doing beyond just the legislation. Hopefully that the legislation will be passed. Like I said, we're a small business, but we've been fortunate to work with some of the largest companies in the world. We just recently announced a pretty large contract with Microsoft. It's a 250 megawatt. It's the first environmental justice power purchase agreement, the term we created. And really the tenet of that is we are directly developing projects focusing on emissionality. What parts of the grid are the dirtiest that we can partner with our corporate partners to develop projects there that still will spur local economic development. But unfortunately, it's really hard to develop utility scale solar projects in urban areas like Philadelphia, DC, Baltimore. I can go on just because of land constraints. So again, we're partnering with our corporate partners as a small business and taking a significant percentage of our revenue and putting it into an environmental justice community impact fund, which is a 501c3, to make direct investments in inner city communities to address things like urban heat islands and a lot of other things that can be done now. What the legislation does is allows us to amplify that. It allows for grid infrastructure, which is antiquated to allow for more renewables to come online. It allows for, the collaboration between renewables and storage and renewables and EV charging stations. But there's a lot that companies, no matter what size you are, can do outside of legislation to make a difference.
So this is tax incentives for businesses to kind of do those types of things, right? You're talking about, Gilbert?
There's
Yeah.
tax incentives, but there's also just the morality of doing what's right. I think that you can do what's right and still make a profit.
Right. There's another question in the queue that is about taxes, which we can move to, unless someone else wants to chime in.
I will just say that on the last question, that what's missing also is a roadmap to Paris, or to the, to achieve those goals. And I think companies operate best in an environment of certainty. So if we see what's coming next, if we see if there are minimum standards in some area that we can get ahead of, if we see that there are disclosure requirements coming up, and how is the fossil fuel decarbonization path going to look specific in specifics. I think that would be helpful to to help the business environment thrive.
You mean actual comprehensive energy policy in the United States?
It's too much to ask for, I know.
This next question is about taxes specifically. It says for Coralie, Maureen, and Jeffrey. Coralie, you said that you approve of paying your fair share of taxes with an increase in the corporate tax rate. Do you feel the same way about the proposed changes to international tax provisions, like lower deductions for global intangible low taxed income and foreign derived intangible income? We're getting down into the weeds here. It must be getting late in the call.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in. I shared in the chat here. I'm glad to follow up with David about this a little bit outside my area of expertise. So, but I will definitely follow up.
Okay, sounds good. I don't know if anyone else wants to take that, but.
Well, I think we're a European headquartered company, as I said, and so we're used to slightly higher corporate tax rates, and to the concept of when a momentous transition is called for, everyone needs to do their part. We're also very much in favor of the talks that are going on in terms of international tax fairness. So I think that's an important piece.
Thanks, Maureen. The final question in the Q&A is, are there any guides or resources to use to advocate for this bill? I don't know if that's the guys from the business associations or if anyone else knows anything along these lines.
We have at the American Sustainable Business Council on our website a great set of tools for businesses to take action. There are sign-on letters that you can sign on to. There's information about other ways you can get active. So I would definitely suggest, and I'm sure E2 has the same set of or similar set of tools, go to the website and it will help you get involved, get educated, and take action.
And I'll just add that I think one thing that everybody can do is look at companies that have put out climate plans and reach out to those companies and ask them for their position on this, because I think it helps. I think employees within these companies talking to their executive teams helps. And yeah, use your voice to ask good questions.
You absolutely can find more information at e2.org. We have regular trainings that we do for business people to essentially learn how to talk to their lawmakers. You can certainly work with us on that. But the important thing is to talk to your lawmakers. It's not hard to call your member of Congress. It's not intimidating. It's their job. And if you're not calling them, the chamber, API, businesses that are against this legislation are going to be calling them. So That's the most important thing.
Thanks, Bob. I don't see anything else in the chat. I have one question. We've heard a lot about sort of lobbying from the chamber, against this bill, and maybe some other business associations, but I think it's primarily the chamber. Why are they so against it? What you all have outlined really good reasons for supporting this. What's the holdup?
Happy to jump in here. I think there's a couple of reasons. I mean, one, there is the influence of the fossil fuel industry, the amount of money they're spending. This is a threat to the future of their business. And they're going to be very vocal about fighting anything that would harm their future profitability and revenue stream. And I think the second reason is simply the cost of the bill and how it's getting paid for. Companies have gotten spoiled by paying very low taxes, and you can't have it both ways. You can't address the social needs that our society has and the threat of climate change without making a financial contribution to addressing what has to be done to take care of those challenges. And American business is spoiled with unrealistic tax rates and with an incredible array of tax loopholes that allows many large companies to pay virtually zero taxes.
I'd like to just really quickly echo what Jeffrey said. I think, in a word, it's short-sightedness as well. That, like we've said, this is in our own financial interests as businesses to be investing in this manner. Paying your sort of fair share is very common language around this. I think that makes sense, makes common sense. But absolutely, if we don't pay for it now, we will pay for it tenfold later. So if we don't act now, we are sort of shooting ourselves in the foot and continuing to perpetuate a climate crisis that we have the power to change now.
All righty. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So seeing no more questions at this time, I'd like to let folks know that if you have follow-up questions, you can contact me, Steve Hargraves. It's at SHARGREAVES, and I will drop that in the chat for everyone, at climatenexus.org. Sent to everyone here. And I can direct your questions to any of the panelists on the call. A recording of this briefing will be available after. If you're interested, please reach out to me and I can get that to you. I'd like to thank our panelists for their time, expertise, and leadership. And thanks to our listeners for joining. This concludes the call. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Everyone.
Thank you.